As we discussed with Lori Wallach of Global Trade Watch last week, Big Pharma is putting millions of lives at risk by refusing to share its vaccine technology in the developing world. The New York Times is there to do some nice PR work for them. Dean Baker joins us on the program. He is the co-founder for the Center for Economic and Policy Research. He also writes the blog Beat the Press, where he provides commentary on economic reporting. Dean, thanks for joining us on the program.
Thanks a lot for having me on.
Can you talk about the situation with the pharmaceutical industry's refusal to share its vaccine technology?
Yeah, well, just to be clear what's at issue, I think anyone who looks at this situation realizes we want to get the world, not just the United States, the whole world vaccinated as quickly as possible. That's a humanitarian concern. We don't want to see people get sick and dying if that could be avoided. And of course, huge economic issue. And it's also very much directly our self-interest, because it doesn't matter if there's a mutation of the virus and it ends up being pandemic vaccine resistant. It doesn't matter whether it happens here or Zambia or anywhere else in the world, it's going to spread. So we really have a very direct interest, apart from the humanitarian one, in trying to get the world vaccinated as quickly as possible. So there's been efforts to try and get the pharmaceutical industry to cooperate in sharing their technology, giving up patent protections, and allowing for more rapid dissemination of the vaccines. And that's most visible. There was a resolution before the World Trade Organization put forward by South Africa, and India has the support of somewhere around 100, the vast majority of its members, calling on countries to suspend patent rights, other intellectual property rights for the duration of the pandemic. So there's a very good argument. There's a lot of pressure, at least from the developing world, to say we should do this. Now, the counter from the pharmaceutical industry is, well, that really isn't the issue. I debated Thomas Cooney, who's the Director General of the International Pharmaceutical Industry Trade Group, and he said, oh, that's really not the issue. The problem is we don't have enough syringes and vials. I'm serious, he said this.
At this point, it's been a year.
Hard to imagine that the problem is we can't produce syringes and vials. I mean, I haven't looked at it, but that seemed a little far-fetched.
Isn't it also kind of horrendous that people accept that on its face? Oh, well, we don't have enough syringes for the poors.
Yeah, I did a blog post after that because I was just so amazed, outraged, whatever. He said that Bill Gates is a moron. Which obviously he didn't directly mention Bill Gates, but of course Bill Gates has, he said, okay, we're going to get the world vaccinated. And you're going, okay, we're 1 year into this, and Bill Gates didn't figure out that we needed syringes and vials. I'm sure Bill Gates I'd never met the guy, but I'm sure he's not a moron. I'm sure he understood that if we want to get billions of people vaccinated, we need billions of syringes.
So what do you think is behind this push to overlook the developing countries?
There's a couple things here. I mean, they're on the one hand, they want to be able to sell this, and there have been a few cases of some real price gouging. I mean, for the most part, if you look at the developing, well, particularly sub-Saharan Africa, they've gotten very few vaccines, but there have been a few reports where they're paying higher prices than we are in the United States. I mean, just incredible. But, I think the more important issue is that they don't want to lose control of their technology. So what they're envisioning, and there was a phone call Pfizer CEO was on with investors, where he said, well, we're looking that after this year, so it's not just the current, hopefully the pandemic will be largely under control sometime this year, at least we can hope, but that after this year, we think people will need booster shots. So there'll be variants, and maybe the resistance, we don't know, doesn't last that long. So 2022, 23, 24, we're all going to need booster shots. So they want to be able to charge real high prices for the booster shots. So the last thing they want to do is give up technology today, if that means that they're going to have to forego profit in next year, the year after, and perhaps decades after that.
One of the questions I had when Lori was on the program, when we were talking about something similar, is that it seems that if the developing world doesn't get vaccines, it's going to create a petri dish for new strains to occur, and then these strains will get back to the U.S., thanks in part to globalization, of course, and create the need for further vaccination against the coronavirus, which is obviously a profit-generating activity for years on end for the pharmaceutical industry. Obviously, we can't go into their motive, because I'm sure they didn't put that on a piece of paper and send that to the Times. But what are your thoughts on possibly, this isn't just about losing their technology, it's about a long-term strategy of profitability?
Well, it is a long-term strategy on profitability. I have to say I wasn't willing to give them that much credit for being that sinister, but I
I
guess I
am.
would. I guess I would say I wouldn't rule it out. I mean, obviously, they're not stupid people. It must have occurred to them that if you really do have it eradicated, then you won't have new strains develop. So that could reduce your market going forward. Now, are they consciously thinking, "Oh, we really don't want to get it eradicated"? I, I wouldn't rule it out. I'd be hesitant to attribute that as their motive, but I certainly wouldn't rule it out.
And how much do you think this has to do with their losing intellectual property rights going forward if this sets a precedent?
Oh, absolutely. It is a huge deal, and of course, I would love to make a lot of that precedent because, as you know, I've been writing on this. I think our system, our patent monopoly financing system for pharmaceuticals is absolutely horrible. So we're seeing that in this pandemic. What we should have wanted, and I wrote about this a year ago. I mean, what we should have wanted was complete openness and sharing of all the research so that we could advance as quickly as possible. And the arrogance of these people is just incredible. And you just try and think of this. So I'm thinking of this debate I had, which was memorable for me, where he's just being totally dismissive of the idea that open research would produce results. And you just go, okay, let's just pick on Pfizer. I'm picking on Pfizer because I know more about Pfizer than some of the others. And obviously a very important vaccine in the scheme of things. So what have they learned since the vaccine first was approved? Well, one of the things they learned was you can get 6 doses rather than 5 out of a vial, 20% more doses. Well, were they the only ones in the world who could have thought of that? There's evidence from tests done in Israel that 1 shot is very effective. I mean, 2 shots better, but that's an important thing to know. And if there'd been research done worldwide on this, maybe we would have known that sooner, because maybe we should have been pursuing a 1-shot strategy, get everyone 1 shot, and then worry about them getting a second 2 months, 3 months down the road. We don't, that's something we could have learned. Another thing, Pfizer announced last month that they developed a method to increase their production by 50%. Great news. But again, are Pfizer's engineers the only people in the world who could have been able to figure this out, maybe figure out other ways to increase production? And then the last thing, they found out that their vaccine could be stored in a normal freezer for about 2 weeks rather than being super frozen. It has to, a special freezer. It goes down to minus 90 Fahrenheit. Obviously, that makes it much more difficult to transport and store. So if we'd found this out, months ago, that would have made it much easier to distribute the vaccine. So that's just a few off the top of my head. But clearly, we benefit from having science be open. And if we said, okay, your technology is fully open, you're getting paid by the government. I mean, it's even more true with Moderna than Pfizer. But Pfizer had an advanced purchase agreement. Its partner picked up $450 million from the German government to build manufacturing facilities. We pay you up front, but everything is open. We could have dealt with this so much quicker. And they're scared to death of that idea, because if that would wipe out their current model. They'd still make, this was one of the things that got me in the Times article. It said, oh, but at the end of the day, pharmaceutical companies need profit. Well, no one's talking, at least no one I know of is talking about a scenario in which they wouldn't make profit. They might not make as much profit as they want, because they want infinite profit,
I'm
but
sorry.
they'd still be profitable companies.
My stomach is turning a bit, and that was my next question on how the New York Times spun this. I do want to say I'm sorry because I hear a little bit of echo, but I don't think it's enough echo to, not hit on this important topic. How did the New York Times spin this other than that? And why was the last word not but the pharmaceutical industry needs to make profit? I think Bernie Sanders would disagree with that. I mean, there are emergency measures. I would think a pandemic would constitute an emergency measure. I mean, how come Pharma can't just split even on this and make sure that the basis of their business model is saving lives?
Well, there are companies being run for profit, but what was misleading with that being the last word, that we don't want to jeopardize their that this is a profit-making industry, because that's how they do things.
I would like to jeopardize.
Well, maybe we would, but the point was, everything in the article, they had already made back their investment plus quite a large amount. So again, I'll pick on Moderna here. They had their research paid for by the government. The federal government paid. This is Operation Warp Speed. Trump did this, whether good or bad. Paid somewhere around $450 million for them to do their basic research, preclinical research, and phase 1 and 2 trials. Then they paid them another $450 million to do their phase 3 trials. So their development costs were fully covered by the government. Then they've been selling vaccines at roughly $20 a dose, and they've sold at this point between the US, Europe, and elsewhere, I'm sure at least 150 million. And that's almost all. I mean, the cost on those is maybe $2 to them. I don't know the exact cost. So what that means is they're making $18 for every vaccine. So if you give them 150 million, that's $2.7 billion on basically no investment, because this was all the federal government picked up the tab. So, and you could tell similar stories about Pfizer, AstraZeneca, the others. They've all easily made back their investment plus a healthy profit. Now, obviously, they'd like to make more, but that's really what we're talking about is, are they going to make a healthy profit, or are they going to make an outlandish profit? And arguably, they've already made an outlandish profit. But the idea that somehow someone's telling them, oh, we have a plan here, you're not going to make any money, that's not the story.
Talk about what explains the Times' action. Is Big Pharma a major advertiser in the Times, or?
It's hard to attribute motives, but I think first and foremost, it's just a manner of thinking that you get into this habit. I don't know how many times, and I've probably even said this on your show before, I've talked about paying for research up front. So we would pay Moderna, as we did. We paid them up front, and I discussed this at more length in some of my other writing in my book, Rigged. That you could have mechanisms where my model here is military contractors. I'm not hugely fond of military contractors, but they do make a profit. They do make good weapon systems. Might not like what we're used for, but they do operate and successfully and make a profit on contracts. They also have patents, but that's not where they're getting their money. They're getting their money on contracts. So we have a model there. But I've often mentioned this, and people will look at me and they go, policy people, economist type people, and they go, well, what would be their incentive? And I've said, we're paying them. I've had times I'd have to be yelling, we're paying them, as though the idea of people working for money is strange. So people are so in the mindset that, if we didn't give them a patent monopoly, they won't have incentive to do research and innovate. And people really do have a problem understanding that. I think I'm at a loss to understand why they have a problem. But again, I've seen it enough among policy types who write on this stuff, who, work in the area, that they literally cannot think that we could have an alternative mechanism, because it's so embedded in our policy that, we use patent monopolies to finance research. We don't pay people up front. We don't pay companies up front.
Dean Baker, co-founder of the Center for Economic and Policy Research. You mentioned your book, Rigged: How Globalization and the Rules of the Modern Economy Were Structured to Make the Rich Richer. I suggest everyone go out and get that book.
Well, you could just download it for free too. So
you can?
Yeah, it's open source.
I did not know that. Oh my goodness, this is wonderful news. Where do we go for that? The Center for Economic Policy Research?
Well, you could just Google Dean Baker and Rigged. It should come up.
Excellent. You're watching Act TV. I'm Julianna Forlano.